Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything. Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook. Again, cover to cover. This is an American history textbook, from the year 1940. That's before we were in World War II, 1940. Here we are in Chapter 9, Slavery and the Union, Section 4, Civil War Leaders. Jefferson Davis, contrast with Lincoln. Jefferson Davis was a president of the Confederate States of America. Davis and Lincoln make an interesting study. Both were born in Kentucky. They were about the same age, but they were different in many ways. Lincoln's boyhood had been passed amid the rudest surroundings. Almost every advantage had been denied him. Most of his knowledge was gained by hard knocks. His hands had been hardened by toil. Davis came from a fairly well-to-do family. His boyhood was spent in a small plantation. Here, Davis had seen slavery. The very comforts that he enjoyed came from the toil of his father's slaves. It was hard for Davis to believe that slavery was wrong. Davis's career. Jefferson Davis had received a good education. He went to college and later entered the United States Military Academy at West Point. Davis made a good soldier. He fought with great bravery in the Mexican War. The Army suited Davis in wartime, but he left it when peace came. The Army suited Davis in wartime, but he left it when peace came. He had chose to enter politics. He was elected to the Senate of the United States. He also served as Secretary of War. His experience in the government service was a fine training for Davis. His career as a soldier and as a statesman seemed to fit him to lead the South. When Jefferson Davis arrived to take up the presidency of the Confederacy, an onlooker remarked, "The man and the hour have met." Robert E. Lee. Leader of men, Robert E. Lee was one of America's greatest soldiers. That might be expected, for he was the son of another fine soldier, Lighthouse Harry Lee of the Revolution. The Lees were one of Virginia's finest families, so Robert Edward Lee was brought up in a good home. The chief fact about his boyhood was the kindness and attention he showed his mother, who was an invalid. Young Lee went to a good school, and then he entered West Point, where he received his military training. I'm not sure what invalid means. An army man. Lee's record at West Point was an excellent one. He worked hard at his lessons and won the respect of his teachers. The cadets liked him too. Cadets are students in a military school. Among them were men he would meet later in life. One cadet was Jefferson Davis. After 4 years of study and work, Lee graduated from West Point. He ranked second in his class. His record was excellent. There was not a single demerit against his record when he was graduated. Robert E. Lee took up his life of an Army officer after he graduated from West Point. For some years, this was not very exciting. Then came the Mexican War. Lee fought bravely and well, first as a scout, then as an engineer. General Scott said he was the greatest living soldier in America, and that he had performed the greatest feat of physical and moral courage performed by any individual. This was a great praise for the young soldier. A few more years, Lee was called upon to make the hardest decision of his life. The Civil War was breaking. His state or his country. Lee did not believe in slavery. He said that slavery was an evil in any country. Furthermore, Lee loved the army. He had just been made the colonel of cavalry. He had a splendid chance at being placed at the head of the whole Union army. Now the Union seemed to be breaking. Lee had to make a choice. Which would it be? His state or his country? "How," he asked, "can I draw my sword upon Virginia, my native state?" So Robert E. Lee left the United States Army when Virginia left the Union. He felt strongly that it was his duty to serve his state. Duty was an important thing in his life. Listen to his words. "Do your duty in all things. You cannot do more. You should never wish to do less." The Confederate States were sure to make a great fight with such a man commanding their forces. Ulysses Simpson Grant. A boy of Ohio, Ulysses Simpson Grant was a general who finally defeated the South. Hiram Ulysses Grant, as he was christened, was born in Point Pleasant, Ohio. His father was a tanner. He prepared hides for shoemakers, harness makers, and those who use leather. Grant's father made enough money to give the boy a fair education. Young Grant did not like the tanning business. He much preferred to cultivate a small patch of the ground and ride a horse. In the army, when he was 17 young, Grant received an appointment to West Point. He also received a new name. His real name, Hiram Ulysses Grant, had unfortunate initials, H-U-G, Hug. The boy knew he would be Hug to the other cadets at West Point. But strangely enough, the name written in his appointment papers was Ulysses Simpson Grant. Grant did not object. He was glad to use Simpson, which was his mother's name. He was also delighted to get rid of the ugly nickname. So he became U.S. Grant. Grant did not particularly like the idea of being a soldier. His principal interest in going to West Point was that he would pass through Philadelphia and New York City on his way. He was only fair at his studies except in mathematics and engineering. He hated drilling. He never seemed to be able to keep in step. No one equaled him as a rider. If only horsemanship had counted, Grant would have been first in his class. It was after 4 years he graduated 21st in the class of 39. The next 10 years Grant spent in the Army. The Mexican War was fought, and Lieutenant Grant served well. He did well because it was his duty, not because he liked it. As a matter of fact, this great soldier never did like war. Years later, Grant remarked to the German leader Bismarck, "The truth is, I am more of a farmer than a soldier. I never went into the army without regret and never retired without pleasure. Never retired without pleasure." Okay. There is a great lesson for us in Grant's life. He never gave up just because he did not like his job. He went right ahead and won. After the Mexican War, Grant married and settled down to Army life. Then he resigned from the Army. He took up farming, storekeeping, and tried to sell real estate. He was a dismal failure at each of the jobs he tried. Colonel U.S. Grant. In 1861, the North faced the South on the battlefield. The call to arms found Grant at the lowest point in his career. He was without money and without friends. A single thing that he could boast was he was training as a soldier. Grant offered his services to the United States Army, but no attention was paid to him. Finally, the governor of Illinois made him colonel of a regiment. A large group of soldiers is called a regiment. Grant took charge but could not appear with his regiment in public. The reason was that the colonel had to buy his own horse and uniform, and Grant had no money. It was some time before he could borrow enough to fit himself out. Finally, Grant became an officer of the Union Army. Unconditional surrender, Grant. Grant was not long in showing he could handle troops. In command of his small army, he attacked Fort Donelson in Tennessee. The fort was well defended by the Confederates, but Grant's attack was skillful. The Confederate commander saw he was beaten and tried to make an easy term of surrender. Grant's answer was at that point, "No terms except unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted. I propose to move immediately upon your works." The fort was surrendered, as well as the army that defended it. This victory earned Grant a fine reception. It also earned him a new nickname, Unconditional Surrender, Grant. Grant was now a major general of volunteers. He made some mistakes. That is why people thought he was just a blundering leader. He kept on fighting. A protest was raised for Grant's removal. Lincoln refused to consider that. He said, "I can't spare this man. He fights." Vicksburg. Grant repaid Lincoln's trust by a great victory. Early in the Civil War, the North saw it must control Mississippi River. The country west of the river was the breadbasket of the South. Large food supplies came from that district. Here's the breadbasket of the South. Picture. There's an actual basket of bread. The South had built a great fortress at Vicksburg on the Mississippi River. General Grant was sent to capture it. It was a difficult job that was well carried out. On July 4th, 1863, Vicksburg surrendered. Other victories came to Grant. Soon he was in command of the whole West. In the meantime, Lincoln had tried one general after another in the East. One after another had failed him. Grant was called to Washington. Lincoln gave Grant command of the Union Army. Pretty interesting chapter there, or section if you ask me. And what I'll tell you now is I hope you have a lovely day. God bless, and I'll talk to you